As a pregnant wife, I let my husband go out for a night with friends. He came home at 3:30 a.m., completely wasted, ignored our crying baby, trashed the bathroom, lost his phone, got random texts from girls, and now I don't know whether to be angry or just disappointed. It was late, much later than I had expected. I woke up in the middle of the night, reaching over to my husband's side of the bed, but it was empty. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, and I had that sinking feeling in my stomach. I had told him he could go out, reassured him that I wouldn't be upset, but deep down, I had hoped he would make responsible choices. Instead, here I was, awake in the middle of the night, realizing he still wasn't home. I glanced at my phone. No texts, no missed calls, just silence. I sighed, rubbing my tired eyes before checking his location. My heart sank a little when I saw it. He wasn't just at one bar. He had been hopping from place to place, drinking more and more as the night went on. I closed my eyes and tried to calm myself. Maybe he was on his way home now. Maybe I was overthinking it. But the clock kept ticking. And then, at 3:30 a.m., I heard the front door creak open. He was finally home. I wanted to get up and see him, but exhaustion pulled me back down. I was sick, heavily pregnant, and needed rest. So instead, I let sleep take over. The morning after, by 6 a.m., the house was already awake. Our dogs were moving around, and our 15-month-old son was starting to stir. If I had been working today, I would have been leaving for my shift at this exact moment, and the thought sent a chill down my spine. If I hadn't been home, would my son still be in his crib, crying with no one to hear him? Would my husband even have woken up? I got out of bed, dragging my tired body through the house, only to be met with a disaster. The guest bathroom was trashed. Everything was knocked over, vomit covering the floor, the sink, the toilet, everywhere. It smelled awful, and to top it all off, my husband's phone was sitting in the bathtub, completely dead. I stared at the mess in disbelief, feeling a mixture of exhaustion, frustration, and disappointment. I knew I had told him he could go out. I knew I had reassured him that I wouldn't be upset, but I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected him to come home completely out of control, unable to even make it to bed properly. By 9 a.m., he still wasn't up, and that's when the emotions really started to hit me. Why I'm upset I had given him the green light to go out. But in my mind, that meant having a good time, then coming home at a reasonable hour, not blacking out, not losing control, not leaving me to deal with the aftermath while I was sick and 28 weeks pregnant. I had called out of work because I was unwell. I had used my PTO to recover. But now, I was standing here, exhausted and overwhelmed, dealing with his mess instead of resting. And the thought that kept creeping into my mind, the one that wouldn't leave me alone, was this: what if I had gone to work? Would my son have woken up screaming with no one to hear him? Would he have been left in his crib, scared and confused while my husband slept off his hangover? I didn't want to start a fight. I didn't want to be the person who gets mad every time their partner goes out. But I couldn't help it. The anger was there, boiling just beneath the surface. He finally wakes up around 11 a.m. My husband finally stirred. He looked miserable, physically sick, mentally drained, and full of regret. Almost immediately, he started doing chores, cleaning up the mess he had left behind. And then, he apologized. He admitted that he had gone too far, that he had let himself lose control. He told me he felt horrible about it, not just physically but emotionally too. He hated that he had blacked out. He hated that he hadn't woken up when our son did. And as we talked, more details of the night started to come out. Apparently, after his coworkers went home, he decided to keep drinking. He hopped from bar to bar, continuing to drink alone. At some point in the night, he gave away $100 to a homeless man. Not necessarily a bad thing, but definitely a sign of how impaired his judgment was at the time. And the weirdest part? The next morning, he woke up to random girls texting him. He had no idea how they got his number. That part didn't sit right with me, but at least he was taking accountability. He told me he was surprised that I had stayed home that morning instead of going to work, and he actually thanked me for being there. Even though he was still feeling pretty terrible, we agreed to talk more about it later when he was fully recovered. Final thoughts: I don't want him to feel like he can't go out with his friends. I don't want to be the kind of wife who makes him feel guilty for having a social life, but I do want him to set limits. I want him to recognize that he has responsibilities at home, that he can't just drink endlessly with no thought about the consequences. I know I told him it was fine to go, but I didn't think that meant coming home at 3:30 a.m., vomiting all over the house, and passing out so deeply that he couldn't hear his own child wake up. I don't know. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's just my pregnancy hormones making me more emotional than usual. But I can't shake this feeling of frustration. Expert opinion. This might be an unpopular opinion, but please don't tell him everything is fine when it's really not. You were sick. You needed support. You already know that when he goes out, he struggles to control his drinking and isn't functional afterward. So why tell him it was okay to go when, In reality, it wasn't. This isn't to say that his lack of self-control with alcohol is your fault, that's entirely on him, but you need to be clearer about your boundaries and expectations beforehand. Would you be upset in my situation, or am I just overthinking everything? Let me know in the comments.